She sells seashells on the seashore. There are two facts about this devious little tongue twister. Number one, it's difficult to get ahead with. And number two, its inspiration comes from a woman who was unforgivably erased from scientific evolution. And this is exactly why most of you are gonna say who when we'll talk about Mary Anning, the unsung hero of fossil discovery who changed everything for women of her time. It's just criminal that the pioneering paleontologist and fossil collector has been unfairly marginalized from the history of her field. This is her story. History hasn't been kind to women scientists, explorers, and researchers. After all, it's a man's world.
This is a man's world. This is a man's world.
Unless and until an indie filmmaker decides to make a completely unhinged and sometimes narratively fictional movie about a woman from science, their contributions largely remain coveted. In popular media, you might have encountered Mary Anning in the face of Kate Winslet, the actress who played the fossil fuel hunter in the movie Ammonite. Sure, the movie is based on Anning, yet the plotline is highly subversive. If there's anything we know for certain, it's the fact that she was a woman, working class, and highly resource deprived, which of course is our fancy way to say that she was poor. These particular characteristics were unfortunate for anyone living in the 19th century Britain. In Victorian times, flashes of sexism and poverty were largely observable in public life. But Mary Anning was lucky in one particular regard. She was born in Lyme Regis, the region in Britain that sits on the Jurassic coast. Now, there are two interesting facts about the coast. One, it's the only natural UNESCO World Heritage Site. And second, it has lived through the entire age of dinosaurs back in its time. Yep, the Jurassic Coast covers 185 million years of history, and its physical composition is layered chronologically. The upper part of the crust is near the age when dinosaurs went extinct, and as you go deeper, you'll perhaps meet the very origin of the animals. So, if you had lived in the Victorian times, you would have probably met her by the foot of Cliff Church in her hometown, and she would have been distinctly recognizable. Dressed in her plaid coat and cape, Mary would have been busy studying every nook and cranny of the coast. She was famous for carrying her wicker basket and the geologist's hammer to split the rocks that were in the way of her fantastic discovery. For Mary, exploring the coast was the best hobby one could stumble upon, but then there were only a handful of options for women to have one. And Anning, the aspiring paleontologist, chose to be nerdy. All she was interested in was exploring her birthplace. But Mary was lucky in one more regard, more or less. Her hobby was just naturally her source of income too. You see, her family was known to run a little souvenir shop downtown. Whatever the family found was sold to dinosaur enthusiasts of their time. You'd be just surprised to know how undervalued the business was. For some reason, the niche for dinosaur souvenirs was highly unrecognized and less sought out. It's a travesty, but people weren't largely aware of dinos. Her most sought out goods were her seashells, which of course inspired a legendary tongue twister. Yep, now you know where the challenging tongue gymnastics comes from. Terry Sullivan's famous song, She Sells Seashells, was written about Mary, and later on this classic British tune became a wildly popular tongue twister among the kids. It's true that the idea of the tongue twister itself wasn't an ode to the princess of paleontology, but the song was definitely written for her, or rather, her small business. So Miss Anning was propelled into the family business at a very young age. She was only 12 years old when she carefully uncovered the entire skeleton of the first ever ichthyosaurus. Sure, her brother was the one who stumbled upon the skull, but it was she who unearthed the skeleton without hurting the structure in any way. A feat that requires a high level of skill, and she did that at the raw age of 12. Just 12. What were you doing at the age of 12? Certainly not changing everything we know about the extinct animal, right? Then, as a series of fortunate events, the discoveries kept piling up. Today, the world might not recognize it, but it was Mary Anning who uncovered the full skeleton of the plesiosaurus and the infamous flying reptile pterodactylus. In short, Mary was thriving. Her career was spectacularly growing into a potential deal for worldwide recognition. But her success called for unwarranted criticism of her male peers, who usually sucked at their jobs and couldn't tolerate a woman doing it so much better than they ever could. What really set Mary apart wasn't just her gender. Unlike her male peers, she was an autodidact. You heard that right. Women of her time had little access to education, let alone equal opportunities in academia or the scientific field. At the same time, many schooling opportunities only came for men. So Mary taught herself key disciplines like comparative anatomy, geology, and French. Her interest in the foreign language was embedded in her passion to study Georges Cuvier, the French naturalist who is cited as the father of paleontology today. To be fair, the fact that she was completely self-taught in scientific theory could have been Mary's biggest flex. But she chose to stay humble in her pursuits and accomplishments. Her approach to her career was largely shaped by how women were perceived in her society. They were supposed to hide in the shadows while men were put in the real world. Yet Mary's discoveries were so monumental that she naturally gravitated attention from her fellow paleontologists. And her interactions with them were hardly pleasant. When an eminent French anatomist met her, he couldn't really comprehend the gravity of Mary's talents and called her a fraud. In another incident, when Gideon Mantell, the famous British paleontologist, visited her in 1832, his comments for her were highly sexist and straight up rude. He called her souvenir business a dirty little shop and described her as a prim, pedantic, vinegar-looking thin female. But despite his casual sexism, Mary's talents kept attracting tourists to the small sea town. Yet, as surprising as it is, there were some notable pieces of appreciation too. One of her admirers was an American geologist who couldn't help but praise her work and her quick wit. After all, Mary Annings was changing the world little by little. Did you know that her discoveries were groundbreaking in putting Charles Darwin onto the map? It's hurtful that this is highly unknown, but Mary's theory on evolution predated Darwin by a margin. You see, she had dismantled the previously held staunch belief that animals never evolve or go extinct. When Mary studied the Jurassic coast up close, she came to the conclusion that animals, like humans, evolve with age due to a number of factors. So if Mary was supplementing science in unprecedented ways, why was she so systematically unrecognized? In Mary's rulebook, whatever she found, no matter how groundbreaking, had to be sold to the rich and elites who could afford it. When the owners died, their family would donate their keepsakes to museums to add more clout and honor to their names. So as a part of the deal, museums would only credit the rich men for making those discoveries by systematically erasing Mary Anning's name from history. In a popular tale, we know that King Frederick II of Saxony visited her shop in 1844 and bought the infamous fish lizard or ichthyosaurus skeleton from her. Eventually, the king's large collection was donated to the museums in England, and Mary's name was never brought up. But also, structural gender bias is only partially the reason. Remember when Miss Annings was 12 years old and she unearthed the entire skeleton of the first ever ichthyosaurus, or the fish lizard? Well, back in Britain, that discovery pretty much got her cancelled from the public eye, and the constant disregard for her discoveries on extinct animals and evolution became her legacy till she died of breast cancer at the age of 47. When Mary began her paleontologist career, scientific knowledge was highly obstructed by the Church of England, and Anning's pursuits didn't align with everything the church was propagating on the age of the universe, evolution, and our history of planet Earth. The bigger punch to Mary's career came later, when the fish lizard's skeleton was placed in the Museum of Curiosities. Local visitors and foreign tourists were in awe to look at an animal that was largely missing from scientific knowledge. And oh, not to mention, this was also when people started to grasp unfathomable evolution and the eventual extinction of living beings for the first time ever. As per Mary's logic, it was certain that creatures only thrive on their own metrics of adaptability that exist in nature, and that particular equilibrium is very delicate or vulnerable. So concepts like doom or extinction weren't just rooted in religion or the Bible. Our changing planet and science were on the forefront of existence too. And gosh, the religious faction didn't vibe with that discovery at all. So the long-term dismissal of Mary Anning and her fantastic discoveries became almost inevitable. Yet today our scientific knowledge has evolved, and Mary emerges as a pioneer of her time. Now when you see young girls with their own baskets and geological hammers around the Jurassic coast, just know that it was Mary Anning who changed the world for them. Feeling inspired? Like this video and subscribe to our channel for more interesting content like this.